All right, we're back on One True Podcast, talking Baylor and Big 12 college football. I'm Bryce Cherry. Alongside me, as always, is Mr. John Werner. And joining us again for the second straight week. It was such a big hit last week. We had Chad Conine.
I guess maybe I'm a normal contributor now.
There you go.
Well, all I can say is the public has demanded it.
Okay. I'm going to need to see the public. So, guys, the cliche tells us that a team's biggest improvement comes from week 1 to week 2. You hear that all the time. That's one of those, colloquialisms. That's a hard word to say.
It only took you 2 tries to get it out there.
Yeah, and the second time wasn't much better. You hear that a lot. And even Dave Aranda, I think, was asked about it last week and agreed with that assessment that, usually a team makes its biggest strides week 1 to week 2. So then, what exactly happened to the Bears? And what do you feel like the most disappointing element of that West Virginia game was?
Well, I'd say unquestionably it's their offensive line. I kind of had questions about it after the Kansas game. I thought, well, they looked okay, but then it's Kansas. And they had some guys back, 3 guys who missed that game. I thought, well, maybe it'll get a little better. It got a lot worse. Gave up 6 sacks. They couldn't run the ball.
Penalties.
Ebner and Lovett ran for a combined 20 carries for 32 yards. And I thought it looked worse than last year. And that was their obvious weak point last year. So, maybe they can fix some things during this bye week. But, boy, it needs to get a whole lot better.
I would say that, that idea that you get better, your biggest improvement is between week 1 and week 2, I would think that really applies to a normal year in which you have spring football and summer workouts and preseason practice all August, and your first live game 1 week and then your next live game the next week. Just when the conveyor belt is operational, which it is not this year in 2020 in any way whatsoever, okay? So, don't be an alarmist, and I want to keep saying, until everybody says it or the year proves me wrong, that this is a season of scrimmages.
You've used that phrase before, and I think it applies.
But on the other hand, on the flip side of it, you guys with all your 8 out of 10s last week on the Kansas game, and I was like, 5.5. I think I was a little bit closer on that one.
That was where I was going to go with my own thoughts on this is, a lot of times the improvement has to do with who you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a fair point. It still doesn't diminish the fact that Baylor was very strong in all 3 phases against Kansas.
Mm-hmm. Granted.
And honestly, John, I think you said Baylor's offensive line played okay against Kansas. I thought they looked pretty good, honestly, against obviously a weak team, but they were down how many starters in that game?
3 offensive line starters.
Yeah, so, it was an impressive performance, but there's a big difference between playing the Jayhawks and going on the road and playing a West Virginia team that's at least mediocre. And let's just face it, I think that this Baylor team may be kind of an up and down team this year. COVID being part of that, but first year coach, first year system, problems on the offensive line, against better teams, they on the road they may struggle, and so I think that plays a big factor into this. But to me, it wasn't just the offensive line that was a problem in that game. I thought it was the entire offense, and certainly another cliche is it starts up front.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think the running backs were good. I didn't think the receivers were good, and I didn't think Charlie Brewer was good. Which brings me to my next question. So obviously Charlie was under duress a lot of the game, as you just noted, John, 6 sacks. But it was far from his best effort. and certainly not what you want to see from a senior 4-year starter at quarterback against, like I said, a mediocre team. As good as Brewer is, and we've seen him, peak Brewer is really good. I mean, I think back to the Texas Bowl, a couple years ago where, he put on the cowboy hat after the game because he was the MVP and, he was top drawer in that game. I mean, that was probably one of his best efforts ever. But he also has mixed in his share of stinkers, So I'm not suggesting that they need to make a change in quarterback, but doesn't Charlie need to play better?
Yeah, I think he still is a little indecisive in Larry Fedora's offense.
Mm-hmm.
Larry wants him to maybe stay in the pocket a little more, not
scramble,
not be as prone to run. But I think that's just Charlie. I think that's got to be part of his game. Just getting out of the pocket and, if he sees an opening, pick up 5 or 6 yards, maybe get a first down. And I don't think you could really take that out of him.
Yeah, there's a fine line, not to step on, I'm sure you were about to chime in, Chad, but there's a fine...
It's brilliant, too.
Well, sorry. There's a fine line between, telling a guy to, keep himself safe or taking away, part of who he is as a player and then letting him loose, we saw that with Robert Griffin in the NFL where it was we want him to run, but we also want him to get killed, and obviously it didn't work out well. Because he got hurt. So, Chad, what do you think?
Yeah, I think quarterback is such an interesting position because you think about how difficult it is, and I've heard it described eloquently as playing quarterback is like trying to defuse a pipe bomb while learning to speak Cantonese.
Okay.
That's deep, man.
That's a Chuck Klosterman.
All right.
That's deep.
And so it's really difficult. So you talk about coaches talking about quarterback, the game slows down for him and things like that, and things like that happen, and you get better as you go along. Theoretically, that's one way it can go. But then the other thing about the quarterback position is that who the most popular guy on campus is?
Backup quarterback.
The backup quarterback.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? So you can get in there and you don't have all this pressure on you. You haven't had a week to think about it, and you go fire off and do all these things right. The more games you get in there and the more you put on tape and the other teams can watch and see what you like and don't like, the harder it gets. And I thought for years, Texas A&M's quarterbacks would start out awesome and get worse as they went along. And so it's I almost feel like you're seeing kind of that situation taking place with Charlie. He's had his first couple of super really good years, and now it's that pivotal point. It's he going to take the next step and be great, or are people going to start really clamoring for Gary Bohannon or Zeno to play?
I'm going to put this out there. None of us have played college quarterback. Let's just put that out there. So, take the criticism, from a place of this is just what we do. It's part of what we have to do as sports writers and stuff is sometimes be a little critical. But I do feel like it is a hard job. It's a lot easier to, throw against air than it is to throw against, when people are coming at you and you're under duress. And undoubtedly, when you are getting sacked 6 times, that gets in your head, and maybe you get happy feet sometimes and you don't need to. But I thought, he had 2 interceptions in that game, John.
Yeah.
And then one that got called back because the guy was out of bounds on the back of the end zone. And I thought all 3 of those throws were not good throws. You could say that about almost any interception, but sometimes you see a lucky interception bounces off the guy's hands or something. But they were bad throws, and ones that I'm sure Charlie watching film wishes he had back.
Yeah, I will say though he really showed how gritty of a player he is though, because their offense was doing nothing. With 4 minutes left, Lovett got stopped at the goal line. It was kind of a questionable play. But then he comes back and hits a 34-yard touchdown pass to Josh Fleeks. And then he hits Ben Sims for a 25-yard touchdown in the first overtime. So, I mean, he still has that.
Right.
And that's why he will be the starter this year as long as he's healthy.
Yeah.
Because he's got that toughness in him.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of my first columns I ever wrote, when Charlie, who did he have that big comeback against when he first got in a game? Remember his freshman year?
Oh, it's West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Yeah.
There you go. And I called him Chucky Comeback, and I think I've trotted that nickname out a few times. But, he has moxie.
Yeah,
Absolutely. He has moxie. And, I mean, that kind of grit, that kind of never feeling like you're out of a game. I mean, that's a characteristic you want in a quarterback, too. So. So I was reading a column this week by Kirk Bohls of the Austin American-Statesman. What do we call him, Johnny?
Well, Mickey Sullivan, this is jokingly, and Kirk even knew this, called him Poison Pen.
Poison Pen. Oh, Poison
Old
Pen.
Poison Pen down there in Austin.
So I was reading a column by
I was going to say, Kirk always got a laugh out of it.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Anyway.
And he put out the poison out there. I mean, he basically hammered the nail in the Big 12's coffin from a national perspective.
Yeah.
And his take, where, it was maybe a little more nuanced in the column than I'm giving him credit for, but basically was that Oklahoma and Texas lost last week. The conference, is hurting from a national perspective, And it's a theory that notoriously bristly TCU coach Gary Patterson bristled at, this week when it was brought up to him in the Big 12 teleconference, and he said, we got a lot of good teams in this conference. I get tired of hearing, about just Oklahoma, Texas, blah blah blah. So I tend to kind of agree with Gary Patterson on this, and I want to get y'all's thoughts. Is the Big 12 ever going to thrive as a conference if it can't get past this notion that the league is down if Texas and OU are down?
Well, I think that kind of goes back to 2014 when Baylor and TCU tied for the championship.
There was definitely, in Gary Patterson's mind, some of that residue.
Yeah, definitely. And, they were both really good and, they didn't make it. And I think part of that, people look down on the league because Oklahoma and Texas weren't quite as good as they usually were that year.
TCU and Baylor aren't a brand name.
Exactly. So I don't know if the Big 12's ever going to escape that. I mean, OU, especially OU, and somewhat Texas should be up there, but they usually aren't every year. I don't know if the Big 12 will ever escape that, just because those are like the traditional powers, and yeah, it's just kind of look that way. If they're down, the league's down.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't agree with that, but I think nationally it's always going to be like that.
Well, what we have here is a very good example of the flawed nature of college football.
Okay.
Because college football is about big names.
Right.
It's not about,
Right.
I don't want to say it's not about equality, because that's like kind of going up against some maybe trigger words that we've seen this year. But I mean, it's about big names, and it's about 100,000 people in a stadium, and it's about Ohio State versus Michigan and Texas versus Oklahoma, and that's what people get really excited about, and to have something that's that popular, and then you have a vote for what 4 teams get to play for the championship. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
It should be a minimum of 16 teams.
Yeah.
And so you see why college basketball is such a superior product to college football.
I knew this is where you were going, and it's a great point, because honestly, like you said, I mean, you roll out in the college football season, you fall out of bed, and it's Alabama Clemson every freaking year. Meanwhile, in college basketball, people just can't get enough of the Cinderella story. I mean, it's all what March is all about. And every year you have some teams that just emerge, and and you know, you have the Gonzagas and the Butlers and these teams that make
Villanova. Yeah.
Loyola Chicago need not apply in college football.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so it's a very elitist sport.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It hurts the league that perception is out there, because Gary Patterson is right. There are other good teams that emerge from the Big 12.
Mhm.
I mean, and we've seen it before, and obviously 2014 is the best example.
So is this the first time we've all three agreed with Gary Patterson?
Probably so. Probably so. Although I do agree with him, you know, in blocking all three of us on Twitter. You know, I mean, anybody from Waco he blocks.
Well, yeah.
So you know.
That's legit.
Am I important enough to be blocked by Gary Patterson on Twitter?
Well, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't say so, but. So, talking about one of those good teams from the Big 12, or at least that has the appearance, the veneer of a good team, we'll get into this, I guess. So, Oklahoma State, they haven't exactly played Murderer's Row here, but the Cowboys are undefeated. They've given up just 27 points in 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty quality, points against. So, could the Flying Mullets be a factor on the national stage in 2020?
I think that really remains to be seen. Yeah. But, you know, I think their defense is really good. They've got a whole bunch of seniors, very experienced. I think that could be pretty good all year. You know, obviously with Chuba. Chuba. I always think it should be Chuba.
It does look like it should be Chuba.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a great running game. I'm not sure about their quarterbacks. I mean, you know, they're probably just kind of average. But, yeah, I mean, the thing is, going back to OU Texas, they've already taken hits. So that's going to hurt the league. That's probably going to hurt Oklahoma State. But if they go unbeaten,
Oh, they're in the mix. If
they're definitely in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a major slight against the Big 12 if you had an undefeated Power 5 team that didn't make the Final Four.
No,
So,
yeah.
I mean, what's your thought on the Cowboys?
So, Coach Mullet.
Gundy?
Mike Gundy, yeah. I drew a blank all of a sudden. It's a weird thing. I couldn't think of his name.
I love that. Okay.
But he's a weird dude.
He is a weird dude.
He might be kind of like underrated weird, like below the radar weird.
Yeah.
But like in all reality, he might be as weird as Mike Leach. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Maybe not that weird.
Well, he is a
Mike
man.
Leach is off the radar. He's off the.
Yeah, but
off the
no,
chart.
I think I understand what you're saying. I do feel like he's underrated weird.
Yeah. And
We all agree he's a man, though, right?
So
He's 40.
he's 50 now.
Yeah.
You know that when he had that rant, it was after they had beaten Texas Tech in a game where neither defense stopped the other offense all day.
Mhm.
I mean, and then that rant happened, and a few weeks later, Bryce and I got ranted at. So I always peg that back on.
That was
old
the year
Coach
of the
Gundy.
rant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all Gundy's fault.
Yeah. But I say all that to say Mike Gundy's weird, right? And this is a weird year,
Yeah.
right? So why shouldn't Gundy's team thrive in this weirdness?
Maybe they should, and maybe they will. I kind of feel like the Big 12 needs them to, as the last lone unbeaten team. So probably the best hope, I guess, for maybe a playoff team.
Yeah, but you're operating under a situation where it's like that there's going to be any validity to any playoff system that happens this year.
Well, so my feeling on college football is it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, and I think it's the dumbest sport of all in terms of the way it's set up. I mean, and I know we're sitting here on a college football podcast, and I'm talking about how dumb the sport is, but I'm not saying it's not enjoyable. I'm just saying that, for 100 years, they had the stupidest way to determine a champion ever, and now it's only mildly better.
Right.
And it's better, but it's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But like what I'm saying though is like 5 years from now, somebody's out there going, we won the title in 2020. Everybody else can be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, that's fair, but I mean, a title's a title if you win it. I mean, you're gonna claim
Says
it.
the guy wearing the Astros t-shirt.
Okay.
Or Astros
That's a whole nother podcast. We're gonna end it right there,
I'm
baby.
just saying, you know.
Don't get me fired up, Chad.
You're losing record going in the postseason and all of a sudden kicking everybody's butt.
It is 2020.